Hey y'all, welcome to my channel. Um, Today I'm going to talk a little bit about Apache Age. Now, it's a graph database extension for PostgreSQL. Sorry. Um, so one of my earlier videos, I gave an opinion about it, but I never really went into the high level overview of what it would be basically. So today I'll just cover very quickly, why you would need it, some of the benefits, some of the drawbacks, of course, as well too, and some use cases, and maybe who should start using it. So one of the things that I could say is like with Apache Age, it's relatively new. But before that, what is Apache Age? Um, so as you see, it's it's a PostgreSQL extension or Postgres extension that adds graph database functionality to the existing relational database. It's kind of an acronym basically, where A is a graph extension, hence Age. It's inspired by Bit9's Agents Graph, which is a multi-model database fork of PostgreSQL. Now, I've never worked with Agents Graph, but I've been hearing really good things about it, quite honestly. Now, I talked about the benefits. I was going to talk about the benefits and negatives of Apache Age, but before that, let's discuss more so of, um, oops, let's discuss more so of how did it come about? The need for it was basically, well, the graph database first and foremost came about because of the amount of interconnected data that grew exponentially. Relational databases struggle to handle all these complex relationships effectively. Um, so Apache Age was sort of brought on board to essentially bridge the gap by providing a graph database capabilities within the familiar environment of SQL or Postgres in this case. Now the question is like, why would we need Apache Age versus other graph databases that are out there? Well, one aspect is basically graph databases for themselves are suited for modeling complex relationships between entities, making them ideal for like a lot of applications. Example, social networks, knowledge graphs, which are a big thing as well, to recommendation systems, fraud detection, but more so now, more than anything else. And I discussed in one of my earlier videos in my channel about vector databases as well too, which is more for LLMs, basically language, natural model language models, basically more than anything else. Well, not more than anything else, but like that's where you're seeing more than the aspects of like LLMs or generative AI from that perspective. And how do you want to? Now, some people are saying vector databases make more sense over graph databases. It can vary depending, and sometimes you can have a graph database on top of a vector database. Sorry, but I can get in more into that much more later. So now, why would we need basically Apache Age? As I mentioned, it was one of those things for fraud detections. But now, like, what are some of the benefits and negative aspects of Apache Age? Now, one aspect for Apache Age that can be very useful is it's more so it leverages Postgres strengths, of course, inherits a lot of Postgres's maturity in large communities. So that's one big positive about it, or one benefit of it. Another benefit is, of course, like it has a seamless integration with Postgres, and it allows users to basically query on a relational level, but also on a graph data level as well too, where those who are familiar with Cypher. Now, Cypher is a big, I might have spelled it wrong actually, it's a CIFPHER. But anyways, that's another language that more often to use when you're querying against graph databases or graph models. And of course, performance. Age is optimized for fast graph data processing and analysis. So think about it this way. You know how we saw with timescale building on top of PostgreSQL. Age is another aspect of that from that perspective as well too. Scalability is another big factor of Age. It can handle large and complex graphs efficiently. Flexibility is another big factor where it supports various graph algorithms and data types, as you see here. Now, I've not messed with Age to say that it can actually be, it's actually that flexible, but it's only time will tell in that situation. So I'm trying to get to the next one. And of course, it's ease of use. Basically, it's easy to learn since it's on top of Postgres. You could still run relational queries like relational SQL queries, but then of course if you know Cipher, you can run Cipher statements on there as well too. But with Cipher, that's a little bit of a learning curve, but on top of Postgres, it makes it a little bit slightly easier for you in certain cases. And of course, one of the other aspects is because it's open source, it is cost effective. You can put it on your existing PostgreSQL infrastructures and go across that, and you just basically have the extensions on there. Now, Age is not available for those that are using managed Postgres environments, meaning when I'm saying managed, like, cloud hosted managed databases where Postgres environments like on GCP or Azure or AWS, like AWS RDS or GCP Postgres or GCP PG or Azure database for Postgres. Those extensions are not available yet. They might be soon enough, hopefully they'll be soon available. And of course, what are the other benefits with Age, Apache Age, that for that matter is it's got a large active community. It's a top level project in the Apache project world. It's got a lot of active users, and the community is pretty large, put it that way. And the other aspect is like Age is also going to be used eventually for other relational databases. One of them, of course, MySQL/MariaDB, because it's another big factor of another database. So between the Postgres and MySQL world, Postgres right now has become more and more popular, but let's not forget the MySQL world or the MySQL users, quite honestly. And then there's the other aspect of too, is being the fact that it's versatile. You can use it again for a large variety of applications, most notably for fraud detection, recommendation systems, which is going to be a big factor, especially when it comes to AI and machine learning. Of course, knowledge graphs, and the biggest factor of all, social networks, which nowadays you're attaching it to almost everything at this point now in this stage in era that we're in, basically, i.e. Web 3.0 or Web 2.0, I want to say. Now, some of the negatives, of course, it's still a relatively new technologies. Some people, because it's new, and there are other graph databases out there like TigerGraph or Neo4j, some people are like, you know what, maybe, there's that hesitancy to adopt it, basically, because the fact is a lot of people are really hesitant in that situation. The learning curve is another big factor as well too. It's easy to use for Postgres users. There's still a learning curve for those that need to, as I mentioned, to learn Cipher specifically, and the concept of graph databases. Not many people are aware fully what graph databases are, how they work. As a SQL person, you can go in and query the data, but it's going to be much harder. But for scalability purposes and performance purposes, if you run it through Cipher, it'll be faster. But it's a matter of understanding that and getting that, learning that very quickly. And then, of course, the limited capability, which is right now it's only available to PostgreSQL. So for those that are using MySQL or any other relational databases, you're not going to see that ability for them unless they're on the Postgres world. And there can be, of course, performance overhead. It's a given. That's always going to happen. You'll have, adding graph functionality may introduce some performance overhead compared to some pure PostgreSQL statements from that perspective. You got limited documentation. Age is still under development. The documentation for it is still under development. It's still being worked out. Some people are, it's, even though it's got a large community, sometimes you can have, some stuff that are missing, basically, some functionalities that are not well documented, unless you go onto the community and start querying them out there. And that was a pun intended, by the way. Lack of commercial support as well is another factor, because the fact is, it's an open source project. Unless there's someone out there like the Databricks, like the timescales, like the data stacks or Mongos out there, where they have let it be open source, and then they handle the support, or Red Hats for that matter, even though Red Hat is no longer doing in that situation. But where you'd have the commercial support to support an open source project of this nature and just work with it, that's one of the big things that I think people will see. Then, of course, even though it's an active community, it's still small compared to other graph databases like Neo4j. Neo4j is by far the biggest one out there. If you are familiar with Neo4j, then this plays a big factor. It helps out in the long term, where you can, your learning curve is drastically reduced as a result. But at the same time, you're not familiar with all the functionalities that Neo4j has that Postgres with Apache Age has at that point. And this one is a question of as I mentioned earlier, if you're not familiar with Cipher, if you run SQL statements, your queries can be much more complex. But if you run it through Cypher and you understand Cypher, it'll be easier. But again, the learning curves come to play at that point as well. So like that's a big factor. This is one thing that I would say is like the integration challenges itself. I've had issues connecting to it properly with proper clients. It's not straightforward and easy as you would think it would be, specifically when you're trying to write some Cypher statements running through the Postgres extension, Postgres driver. It is a little bit cumbersome, put it that way. And then there's the potential for vendor lock-in as well too. If it becomes widely adopted, there may be a risk for a vendor lock-in. I mean, have I seen that happen in the past? No, but it's not uncommon, put it that way. Now, you might ask, what are some of the, not drawbacks, but what are some of the use cases for Apache Age? So you're wondering like, okay, hey, Apache Age, I kind of mentioned it in some aspects of what it could be used for. One of them, of course, could be social networks, where it can model complex social interactions, enabling efficient analysis of user relationships and behavior. Another one is knowledge graphs, which I mentioned earlier as well too, where Age can store and query vast knowledge bases, enabling intelligent search and reasoning. Recommendation systems. Age can analyze, or Apache Age can analyze user preferences and item relationships to generate personalized recommendations. And there's, as I mentioned, I think I mentioned earlier as well too, fraud detection. Age can identify anomalous patterns and relationships to detect fraud activities. This one's a little tricky in the situation where, based on the patterns that you're coming in, you're going to have to use some, sort of machine learning or modeling to determine that. And this is where it comes into play by using graph. And like any machine learning that you do, graph databases were the natural progression towards it. And then, of course, vector database became the much larger aspects. And when I said vector databases or graph databases can be talk to vector databases, I meant vice versa. You could have vector databases on top of a graph database, basically. And then, of course, another big use case as well, too, is supply chain management. Age can track product movement and relationships to optimize your supply chains and prevent disruptions. Put it this way, it can be used in a aspect of blockchains or the ledger system that we're familiar with, blockchains. This is one of those things where it plays a big factor, and you can actually use Apache Age graph databases with the blockchain to track all this stuff and like kind of see the relationships between the logistics of what you're trying to do at that point. Now, as far as who should start using Apache Age, anyone that's basically dealing with large amounts of interconnected data, like a need to perform complex graph queries, anyone that's basically using PostgreSQL, Apache Age is just an extension. It doesn't affect the existing Postgres environment or underlying engine or such. It's just more of a case of like just putting Age on top of like any other extension and just using it. It's like having, let's say, PostGIS on there. You're not using PostGIS, but it's there, and it doesn't hurt it basically, unless you need to use some graph data, use some graph database querying or graph modeling basically. And then, of course, if you're looking for open source, cost-effective solutions, this one is another one as well too. And then the last piece where you should start using it is if you're willing to invest into a new technology. Now, investing into a new technology plays a big factor as well too. And like, it's sometimes with new stuff that comes out there, it's hard to adopt newer technologies, more so because the fact is like a lot of people are sometimes afraid, put it that way. They can be afraid from a perspective of what they're trying to do. Now, Apache Age is definitely a promising graph database for, an extension for the Postgres world, where, it offers like, a graph database within the familiar environment of PostgreSQL. So for those in the Postgres world, it works really well to the point of like, if you're familiar with Postgres, again, with all the other extensions out there, like PostGIS, like Timescale, etc., or CitusDB for that matter, this works well into that aspect that you can just use it from that perspective. Again, it's particularly suited for organizations that's dealing with large amounts of interconnected data that needs to perform a lot of complex graph queries. You're going to say, it's like, well, how often are you going to use graph queries? you'd be so very surprised nowadays with especially the way data is becoming the new oil standard and how we're seeing a lot of the data mesh or data fabric world more than anything else. Graph queries are becoming more and more interchangeable, or yeah, and more, I don't want to say interchangeable actually. It's becoming more integrated within the data lifecycle for essentially every the data lifecycle for every application that's already out there. Now, of course, there are drawbacks to consider, but with the benefits and versatility of Age, it does make a compelling choice, quite honestly. And I would say, like more than anything else, if you have a Postgres environment already in place, I would say just go with it. Just leave it be, and not leave it be, but install it and test it out. You might as well have it on there. I mean, it does add a little bit overhead of storage wise, but again, it doesn't eat into anything until you utilize it. And I would say it doesn't hurt at that point. I mean, honestly, for me, some people have asked us, like, why do you install Postgres? And I'm like, it doesn't hurt the Postgres environment. It basically is just an added feature that allows you to do stuff. It's just a little bit of storage space, but it doesn't really hurt it that much. Similarly to any of the other extensions out there. So why not do that with Apache Age? It works out really well. But with that, I'll leave it at that. It's been a high level overview of this. I already gave my opinion earlier on. I think this is a new technology that's very something that you should be looking into. Quite honestly, I would not be surprised if someone else out there decides to take Apache Age and start to commercialize it on there and try to provide what Timescale did for Postgres for the time series aspect of things. Let's not be surprised that Apache Age, someone's going to come out, maybe even Timescale themselves might adopt it and start using it, and they might support it as well too. I would not be surprised in that from that perspective. But with that, I'll leave it at that. Let me know your comments in the comment section. I do read all my comments. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. I do respond to them when it's related to this. Also, by the way, if you want me to go a little bit more in depth, again, please leave it in the comment section. I'll probably be a little bit more in depth, or a little bit more thorough. Probably try to do I don't want to say a real world example, but I could possibly put in a real world example for you. But outside of that, I'll leave it at that. Again, if you like my video, like my channel, like my content, please subscribe if you haven't subscribed. And also with this video, please like or dislike. If I can tell if I should be focusing on this content, like more tech content, or more other content, if you see my channels, I talk about sports mostly as well too, and as well as talking live stuff about it. If I should focus more on the tech side of things, let me know with a like or dislike. But also at the same time, I do welcome opinions as well too in the comment section about what can I do to make this better, and make this much more easier and much more effective. I think, of course, in this situation, I'm 18 minutes into this. Probably should have made more bullet points, a little bit more easier to use and much more readable, but more so maybe putting in some real world examples. But if I do that, it's probably going to be an hour long. And if you're willing to wait that long and watch me do this stuff, then let me know. But with that, I'll leave it at that. As always, unfiltered, unedited, and of course, always unrehearsed. Until next time.